to Drupal Rotach, or Drupal for Warriors, Multilingual Drupal. All right, so give me a bit of an introduction. My name is Pascoe-Deslauriers. I'm the CTO of Coldfront Labs. I have been working on Drupal for a long time. I think we're probably at 17 years. Oh no, do I need to update this slide? But I would say I'm an expert in Drupal. Something I'm not an expert in is the Klingon language. I have been learning it for about a year. It kind of started as a joke when I received Klingon, or Hamlet in Klingon as a gift, and then decided that I was going to then try and learn the language to read it. Because we have to do that kind of thing when you get a silly gift like that. So, not an expert in Klingon, but we'll learn some Klingon along the way, and we'll hopefully learn some stuff about Drupal's multilingual features. So here what we're going to talk about is how language handling is done in Drupal, how multilingual is done in Drupal, what's required for Drupal in Klingon, and we'll also talk a little bit about the Klingon language, so that we're not just learning about boring stuff. So linguistics in Drupal multilingual. Exciting. So, why Klingon? Klingon's kind of a fun language to learn. Oddly enough, lots of people seem to know at least one word in Klingon. Everyone knows ghajlaH, which is success, even people who don't know anything about Klingon. And it is a flimsy pretext to talk about language handling in Drupal and how you build multilingual applications with Drupal. So, why would Klingons need Drupal? Why would you need Drupal in Klingon? Well, if you need a CMS for Klingon speakers, there aren't any native Klingon content management systems. I've checked, so you need one that would support the language, because there's no native CMSs in Klingon. So if you need that, that's one of them, or this could be a reason. You may need a CMS that supports Klingon as well as other languages for your diverse multi-planetary team that you're building an application for. You may have a requirement that you need to make certain information accessible to Klingon speakers. It is always important to present users a website in their preferred language, which may be Klingon. Or another reason why you might need to do this is you may have a legal requirement to make all information services available in Klingon and other languages. So these are situations you might find yourselves in. So the other important thing is pok, wech, noch, nak, nach, lach, ghach, loch, chor, which is language is an important part of web accessibility. So part of accessibility is that users get things in their language. All right, so we're not just going to talk about that. We're also going to learn to speak some Klingon. So I want you to speak some Klingon throughout this. So I'm going to say ghajlaH, which means do you understand? It's the plural to the group of you. And you can say ghajlaH, or you can say ghajlaH, or you can say mayaj. For ghajlaH, yes, or ghajlaH, I understand, mayaj, we understand. All right, so let's talk about Drupal. What are languages in Drupal? So the first thing to know about Drupal is the default language in Drupal is English. All the built-in strings in the code are originally in English. So all the messages, descriptions, and text, they are all in English and they should be in English. However, there are several systems in Drupal that let us change what this text is before the user gets a chance to see it, or before it gets to the user. So what is a multilingual? So the multilingual features in Drupal give Drupal a few bits of functionality, a few abilities. The first being to detect the appropriate language for the user. So the first thing, before we show user, decide what you, first, before we can show a user some text in their language, we need to be able to detect what language they actually want in it. Then we have to be able to display text and strings in that language. We do need to then manage content that is in different languages. And we need to manage content that are translations of other pieces of content. And those last two things are two different things. Because I could have articles that were, this is an English article and this is a Klingon article, and they're not the thing, they're not the same article. Or I could have an article that has an English translation and a Klingon translation, but we're saying this is actually the same article but available in two languages. They're not two different articles, they're translations. So both of those are two different pieces of functionality that we can do in Drupal. So, where do we start? How do we enable language support? So in core, it comes with these modules. There's the languages module, interface translation, and configuration translation, and content translation. So, language setup. So this comes with the languages module, and this lets us set up various languages in Drupal. Let's go and take a look at what that looks like. So if we have our Drupal site on configuration, right here under region and language, we have languages. And then this is the enabled languages that we can use on our site. If we click Add Language, we can then add support for the language that we want, and then there's a list of all the languages that have translations on Drupal.org. We can also add custom languages. Oh, but I'm thinking that module might not be on. Oops. So, to enable the language modules, that's all. There's a section for modules called Multilingual. Let's turn those on. All right. Now we have more options. Languages. Oh, sorry. Custom languages here. So, it's a little surprising, I know. Klingon is not one of the official supported languages in Drupal. You may also run into languages that are not supported by Drupal.org, but you can still add them to your own site. So we will add the language code for Klingon, which is K, and the language is Klingon. Oops. Yeah, it's going to try and update translations, but it's going to discover that it doesn't have any. So that's nice and fast. There we are. So now our site has got two different languages in it that we can do things in. It has English and Klingon. All right. So even if we didn't add an extra language, you might find that Drupal comes with bonus languages. For free even. You'll see these two other languages on things. So the first language is und, and the second language is these languages are special languages that are used to represent specific things. Und for language unspecified content, and z for language not applicable. There's lots of content that you could have, or things that you could have in your site, where having language doesn't make sense, because those things just don't have translatable strings on them. And so that these are built in to sort of handle those cases. They are not things you generally run into with most of the strings and translations and stuff you generally deal with in multilingual, but if you are playing with languages, you will see these bonus languages, and it's important to sort of know what their role and place are. All right, let's talk about some Klingon. So this is fun. Klingon is usually written in what we call Latinized Klingon. So instead of using a Klingon symbology for it, we just use Latin characters. Klingon, which makes it a pretty awesome language compared to human languages, is phonetic. Phonetic languages for the win. So if you learn the sounds of all the letters, you can read every Klingon word. Isn't that wonderful? Latinized Klingon does something a bit strange though, is it mixes uppercase and lowercase characters, but they're not used for syntactic markers. They are used to emphasize that that letter is pronounced differently than it would be in English. So you're going to see Klingon with uppercase letters not at the beginning of the sentences, but like randomly throughout, because there's a few characters that are represented by uppercase letters. The uppercase D, H, and Q, mostly. All right, so Klingon vowel sounds. You have A, E, I, O, and U for those vowels. Pretty straightforward. The uppercase I is the different one because it's not pronounced I, it's pronounced E. And then there are a few digraphs or diphthongs. So that's two vowels together to make a different vowel sound. So ow, E, I, A, U, Oi, and Ui for these ones. So now you can do the Klingon vowels. Klingon consonants. I group Klingon consonants into two different kinds of consonants. Ones that have sounds like we have in English, and then the other ones for sounds that we definitely don't have in English. So there is the B for like blocks, makes a B sound. A ch, so we pronounce that as one consonant. I guess we pronounce it in English as one consonant, even though we use two letters. So ch, a j sound. It's always j, never g. L, so a l sound. M, so m, n, n. P, so the p sound is the same as English, but always forceful, real puff, really. So you got to really give her on the P's. R is a so lightly rolled on the R. T, sort of same kind of T sound, but you really got to give her there too, a little like a t, really like, yeah. So in Klingon, there might be some spit. This is normal. If you feel if everyone, I want you to sort of practice making some sounds. If you feel any wet on the back of your head, this is normal. It does not bother Klingons. So, just with V, same, W, W, and then a Y. And then we have consonants that are sort of like in English, but slightly different. So the uppercase D, it's a D, but it is pronounced retroflex. So stick your tongue, instead of bouncing it off the back of your teeth, stick it straight up and say g, g. That one's not a spitty one, so you guys don't need to be afraid. You can say g. The next one is one we have in English all over the place, but we don't mark as a consonant because we just spell it with N. It is n. So there's a difference between n and n. So n, like in settings tray, n. The difference in Klingon, English, we don't put a n at the beginning of a word. You do in Spanish, but in English we don't. But in Klingon, it can be at the beginning of a consonant cluster. And then there's Q, which doesn't make a k sound. It's like the D, it's a retroflex k. So tongue straight up and k, k, k. So touch your tongue to your soft palate, k. And S is another easy one. It's a sh. Oh, sorry, it's another retroflex one. It's a sh sound, but retroflex too, tongue to the soft palate. All right. Now let's get to the weird ones. These are the good ones. So, The uppercase H is a h. So it's tongue back, just h. So hey. Now, once you can do that, we're gonna really make it a bit spittier. And we're gonna do the uppercase Q. This is the language. This is a sound that's not in English either. It's a k. So while we're doing that one, we're going to work on this other one, which is a digraph too, the GH. This does not make an sound. It makes same kind of h, but we're going to engage your vocal cords with this one and do a it's like a growl almost. So instead of the TLH, which is a trigraph, is a very different sound. It's, we're going to stick your tongue sort of in the middle, and you're going to blow out both sides. So you're going to go clip, clay, clay, clay. So, and that's how you do that one. It's also the first letter in the word Klingon in Klingon. It's Klingon, Klingon. The final consonant is spelled with an apostrophe. So you'll see apostrophes everywhere. It is treated as a consonant in Klingon, and it is a pause. So if you see, it'll be used as a consonant, but it is a pause or a shortening. So there's the word ti. So ti is the word for vegetation. Ti apostrophe. So with the apostrophe is tip. It's a faster and cut off. And that is the verb to repair something. So tip. So and the same thing in the word ghajlaH. It's because it's ghajlaH. All right, back to Drupal. Now, so there are, where are we in this? So the language Drupal, once Drupal picks what language that it needs to, that you're using, to pick the language Drupal needs to display, Drupal actually tracks two different kinds of languages. So you can see things in multiple languages at once. It tracks an interface language and a content language. You can also set these to be detected in different ways. Content language affects the language that the content will render in. Interface language will affect the language that the interface renders in. So any interface screens like any help or navigation, that kind of stuff, and then for like menus and content will be the content language. Generally, you want this to be the same. You do not want to be navigating a site that's in two languages at once, but you could, but you can. The big note for that is not all modules support browsing in multiple languages at once, and may do their language detection for how they present an interface thing using the content language. Because generally the content language is the language that people want the content in. So, a content language. So we're talking about the content language. By default, content that you create in the site is created in the content language, or in the site's default language. And the way that this can be selected can be configured. So there's various options and plugins for how you want languages detected and configured. If you go back to the language page, there is a tab for detection and selection. And every one you enable works like, okay, I think you guys can read this. It will follow through the different ways Drupal will try and detect languages. If you want to be absolutely correct, you could do this. Browsers announce what language they're in to the site. And so in this situation, we would say detect the language from the user's browser. If the user's browser isn't giving us a language, then we can say, hey, detect it from a URL or path prefix. So we could say if the paths start with /clip, then it means the user wants Klingon. If they don't start with that, then the user wants English. We can also change this, so we can set it to be detected by domains. So if you have an English domain and a Klingon domain, you can have your English domain be how you're detecting English users, and your Klingon domain be how you're setting your site up to detect Klingon users. You can use multiple of these at the same time as well, sort of like there. And this is also pluggable with configuration or contrib modules. There's a module called language selection page, which is a good one, and it lets you combine it with the URL. You can just say, or combine it with other things, where you can put the URL first and be like, hey, this is my prefix for English, this is my prefix for Klingon. And then if a user came into a URL where we don't know the language, and let's say we have a legal requirement to show users content in their preferred language, whether it's English or Klingon, we can use the language selection module, which will show up as another one of these, and we can put it just under URL. And it'll say, and with the way it works is it'll detect you coming in without, or the user coming in without a language, and will rewrite you to a language selection page that says, hey, what language do you want? Ideally in both languages, what's the point? But it'll offer up a call to action in both languages at the same time. The user makes their choice, and then they're taken along to the final page. And so that way we can sort of guarantee know which language that the user wants. And so we have all kinds of options to detect it. Users can also have a preferred language. That's one of the things users have in their options. So we can say, hey, if we know who you are, we always offer you content in that language. And so we can just detect it from that way instead. All right, language switching. By default, or generally, you don't want to hard code any links into specific languages or anything like that. Drupal will handle language switching for you, and so you should leverage Drupal's doing that. Drupal comes with a block called language switcher, and so that block you can place, and it will offer the enabled languages, and you can switch languages using the link on that block. You can also write your own language switcher, or you generate links in any language you want. When you are generating a URL with Drupal from a route, you can offer the language that you would like that URL in. So if you know the route that you're on, and you know the language that you'd want to be in, you can say, hey, for this route, give me the URL to it in this language. And so Drupal will always tell you the correct language URL for that, if you're doing URL language detection by the URL. All right, so let's talk about interface translation. So before we looked at, there's 3 kinds of translation: interface, content, and configuration translation. The interface translation, interface is all of the built-in strings inside of Drupal. So every time there's a bit of code that needs to put a message or have some kind of string or anything where it is part of the code, or if you have things embedded in templates, which are code yet again, there's lots of strings that are just part of that. Part of just the systems that run Drupal. All of these are interface strings. And so these can be updated and modified. So the way that Drupal handles this is that every time it sees one running, it collects that into its database and then tracks to see if it has a configuration or if it has a translation for it. So these end up being interface strings. So let's we can take a quick peek at that in our Drupal site. So if we go back to not languages, actually we can sort of see how that looks like here. Right now, my Drupal site has not run into many Klingon strings, and so it has detected that it has attempted to render 328 strings, and has Klingon translations for none of them. So, not unexpected. If we go into regions and languages, and then we go into user interface translation, there we are, we can now view all the strings that it saw and provide translations for them. So this is all the strings when Drupal runs into them, tries to render, can't, because tries to render them, it sort of records this into its database. As it imports changes, it will add the translations that it finds. So if you want to translate all the interface of the site, this is where you do it. However, if you're fortunate enough to not be using Klingon as your language, and it is one of the supported languages on Drupal.org, you have the benefit of using localize.drupal.org. So when I enabled Klingon as a language, it said it was importing translations. It was going to localize.drupal.org to collect them. So this is the central site for where all the translations in the Drupal community are managed. When a supported module is enabled, it connects there and downloads all of those. Also, if you're interested in contributing to languages on localized.drupal.org, let's take a look at what that process looks like. So this is localized.drupal.org, and it has the languages of, it shows you at first Drupal core, but you can also pick other projects, so any contrib module will be there. Views, why did I type views? That one's in core. Let's pick one that's not in core. Let's spell it right. There we go. So we can take a look at this and get a layout for how this is translated into which languages, and we can see the progress of different languages. So if we wanted to take a look at French, French is completely translated. So French, this module is completely translated, so this is not a great example. But the way it is, once on localized.drupal.org, you can join different groups for different languages. When you're initially join a group, you can suggest translations. I am not in the French group, so I cannot do that. But just because you suggested a translation doesn't actually officially add it. Somebody who has approval for your translations has to then approve it. If you go and look at some of the, let's not look at token. Let's look at the French board. There we go. Let's go back in here, because we'll see some real weird untranslated stuff. Let's go to last. All right, here's some untranslated terms, so we could add suggestions for those. But if we get into terms that we'll get into some that have multiple translations, and you can see people who have the ability, who have the option of, we won't dig into this, but if you have that permission, you can go and choose which translation option somebody selected that you want to use. So if you know a language and you want to contribute to having Drupal in that language, localized.drupal.org, it works with your Drupal account. I don't work with them at all. I have nothing to do with them, but it's good work. So I'll do some advertising for them. All right. So the way that language interface strings get passed around is with these PO and POT files, and these are portable object files. They look like this. They have what your original string is, and then what the translation is, and then we'll have a PO file for every language of that specific thing. If you have specific strings you want to bundle in with like a custom module that you're writing, you can include a PO file and have Drupal automatically import it, so that if somebody, and you can include a PO file for every one of the languages you want to support, so you can add built-in language string support to custom modules that you're writing. All right, let's talk about some Klingon sentences. So Klingon syllables usually have the following structure: constant, vowel, constant. So there's not a whole lot of just constant vowel things, and there's never really a standalone vowel. But do remember that that apostrophe, that stop, can be the first consonant of a cluster like this. So you're going to end up with, and so Klingon words are generally one syllable, but they can be multiple syllables. The syllables are these structures. And Klingon uses suffixes to change the meanings of the words. So there's 9 types of verb suffix and 5 types of noun suffix that you can have. Klingon doesn't have adjectives. So generally the suffixes take the same form. So if you have ghajlaH, which we learned earlier, so they understand. If you just say ghajlaH, it's they understand it. If you say ghajlaH, that's they can understand it. Because the lach suffix indicates that you can do what that verb is. You have the bet suffix, which is a negation, which you can put anywhere in it. So ghajlaH bet, they cannot understand it. And then you could say something like ghajlaH dit, which would be when they can understand each other. All right, so importing and exporting translations. There are various tools, and there's a module in Drupal that allows you to import PO files, and you can do it sort of from vu'wI or from DaneH, to export all the translation strings that were detected in Drupal. So all of my 300 Klingon strings, I can import that into a PO file. And PO is a standard format, so there's translation software that supports it, so you can give it to a translator or a translating organization and get those strings translated, and then re-import them back into Drupal and update your translations. So that it gives you an ability to manage all of those. So let's take a look at how you use interface translations if you're programming. If you're writing any built-in strings in Drupal, you should be using the T function. So if you're using it in a .module file outside of the object context, it is just a global function called T, and so you just stick your string in that. If you are in an object, there is a trait for translation that gives you a T method, so you should use that trait, and then you end up with the T method. Frequently, strings have variables. So you should not hard code variables into it. So you don't want Drupal detecting the strings like, there are 3 results, there are 4 results, there are 5 results, there are 6 results. You just want to stick a variable in there so that you only end up with 1 string and only need the 1 translation. Drupal lets you embed these variables inside, so you can add these tokens to words in your strings, and then when you call the T function on them, you just sort of pass the data in, and that way you normalize your strings, so you can have strings with dynamic sections in them, and they can be translated. The different symbols mean different things, so the @ symbol will sanitize the URL, the % sanitizes it and wraps it in M tags, and then the lesser used colon will format it as a URL. Here's the string translation trait that I was talking about. If you're writing objects and they have strings, you should be using the string translation trait. So all you have to do is use this to bring it into your namespace, and then inside your class, use it again. Because PHP uses the keyword use for 2 different things. Use import namespace, and then implement trait on this thing. So that's why it says use twice. They mean very different things. So don't be confused about that. But if you haven't used traits, they look a lot like objects, but they are collections of methods that you can imbue on your own object. So the string translation trait has a method implementation. And by saying use, it means now your object has that method. But that's not all. JavaScript also has a string function, or a a T function. So it works the same way, and the way that JavaScript does that is it does scan all the JavaScript files that it implements for the T function and extracts the strings and then puts those into the interface translation. Twig, there's another syntax because it has to be twig. So you have a filter for it, or you have, well, these are both filters. So you have a filter that you can run it through that works in the same way. All right, more Klingon. So most Klingon words are either verbs or nouns. Klingon doesn't have any adjectives. All the adjectives are basically verbs. Klingon's a language about doing things. The sentence structure in Klingon is the inverse of what we would normally think of in English, where we have object, verb, subject. So if you said, Kav bishop jich, you were saying I eat gach, even though jich is the pronoun for I, and kav is the word for gach, and then bishop is the verb for I eat it. But if you said it like you would in English, I eat gach, you are actually saying gach eats me. So not what you want. The verb order or the word order is different. All right, we're running out of time, but I suppose we'll have to see. Oh yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, quick question. Can you have an English translation? Like for example, if your text is color, C-O-U-R,
Yeah.
but you want to ship it to the States and they want ORs, but you can't just change the original text in your code. Sometimes you just want to do a minor change in your text without having to go to the code to do it.
So yeah, there's actually two different ways to do that. The one way, sort of similar to what we have in Klingon, where we had Klingon as a custom language, you could add Canadian English as a custom language. And that way you could have content and strings in English and Canadian English. And the convenient thing is you don't have to do an 100% translation if you're just using Canadian English. So that's one way. If you want to globally overwrite a language or a string in your site, there is a module called string override. Shoot, it's not translation override. I think it's string override that lets you override any of the strings so that when it's presented, even if it's in the main language, that it's spelled the way you want. So you have those two different methods, and you have to sort of look at which one will work best for whatever your use case is. But yeah, you can override that. So it also works for things like if you wanted the French that is used for Drupal's French may not align to Canadian French very well. So you could have a Canadian French that you stick over top of it. So the other kind of translation that you could have in Drupal is configuration translation. When you configure something, you're frequently adding strings, like when you build a view. That adds all kinds of strings to the site. And I guess the other thing too is if you're setting like date and time formats, those are very different in languages, in different languages. Those generate config files though. So they don't work like interface translation strings. Inside of Drupal, whenever you have that, you can actually add a translation of the configuration, and when you export the configuration, it'll export the overrides to that configuration in the different languages, but that is in a different place. So generally, if we do date and time formats here, we can translate this one, and we can add a Klingon translation for this date and time format, or for this label, and we could add it there. But we could also add, where's one that we could modify, translate, there we go, Klingon. There, so we can actually change the date format, how it renders when it's in Klingon or other language. And then this gets exported as config, or an override to the config for this specific language. There is a main page where all of that is managed in terms of configuration translation. So everything you have the different kinds of configuration, and you can go in and take a look and manage how all the strings in those configurations are changed. Oh, not here. And so this is, when this exported, it'll export the language configurations inside its own directory. So finally, content translation. So content entities can be configured to support multilingual or translation. When you do that, you also have to configure which fields can be translated, because not every field can be translated. And when the content is translated, you get multiple entries in the database with the same node ID, but different language. So the key for things inside the database is not just its ID, it's also the ID plus the language that it's in. So if you have a node that's translated that is in English, French, and Klingon, it means there's 3 entries for it in the node table. It shows up 3 times. So it's something to take into consideration if you are making views. And you're like, hey, why is this node here 3 times? Well, it's there 3 times in the database, and you're not filtering by language. And Drupal is happily rendering it in the language that you've selected. So it looks like it's showing up 3 times in Klingon, because you're using Drupal in Klingon. But it's actually the English, French, and Klingon versions. Drupal also takes a special consideration for what the source language is. Translations aren't all equivalent. Drupal tracks what the original language is, and then everything else is a translation of that language. And so it does that so it can track when translations become outdated. The other thing about translations is fields that are not translatable, or that you've set to not be translatable. And there's lots of reasons to have those. Numbers generally don't need translations, so you wouldn't translate those kinds of fields. Lots of different kinds of references don't need translations. But those are not modifiable in translation, when you're making translating or when you're translating something. What's that? For sorry? Currencies? So that is going to be how you're going to display things in different languages. Because, I guess for different currencies, if you want to, would you want to attach a different currency, or are you talking about currency format? Currency format is going to be how you're going to display that field data. So the number itself, as long as you're not dealing with multiple currencies, is going to be the same. So the core data is not translated. $20 in English is 20. It's still 20 in French and in Klingon, because the dollar stays the same. But we might render it differently. So we would change how that field renders in the different languages. So we're just talking about different fields that why we want to translate them and maybe move on. All right. So translating content. Content translations are all managed on the translation tab of your Drupal site. So if you have languages enabled, and we create some content. Let's say this. Do I have it? I don't have this type thing translatable. Darn it. Okay, but there would be a tab here where you can manage your translations and add translations to it and see what the translations are. So there's a few caveats with translations of things. If you've used the module paragraphs, the entity reference revision fields that point a node to its paragraphs are not translatable, and you don't want them to be, because you want the paragraph to be translatable. So the paragraph holds fields that can be in multiple languages, but your reference to it should be not translatable. So there's a few sort of weird situations you can get when you're referencing things, because you may not want to reference different things in different languages. It might be the same thing that you're going to reference, but that thing shows up in different languages. I sort of hinted this before, because things show up in the database multiple times, one for each language. If you're on a multilingual site and you are not filtering by language, things will show up multiple times, one for each language, because each of those entries is technically different. So if you only want things to show up once in a view, you need to filter out by the language that you're looking for. Or filter in a different way, but usually by the language that you're looking for. All right, so we're getting to the end, and we're a little over time, but we'll push through. So we'll talk a bit about the Klingon verb prefixes a little bit. So we sort of saw some of these, but the way that Klingon pronouns connect to something in the verbs is they take a prefix. So there's this helpful little chart that explains them. So we had ghajlaH, which is I understand. So if you're saying I, the prefix is G. But if it was I understand you, then it's ghajlaH. Or b'ghajlaH, so you understand. And then cho'ghajlaH, it would be you understand me. So in the same verb, you can add sort of the pronouns of who's happening to what. And this is sort of how you imply different things in Klingon. And so verbs by themselves work very differently. If I just said walk, that wouldn't make any sense. But in Klingon, it means that he is walking, or she walks. Okay, so we're getting into some more complicated things to do with translations. And since we're over time, we'll just skim through them really fast. One of the modules that you might have seen and might want to use is the TMGT, or TMGMT, which is the Translation Management Tool. This lets your Drupal site work with a group of translators. If someone just, you can kick me off whenever I'm good. I'm going to move it. Anyways, what this lets you do is it lets you group translations together and create a basket of them and then assign them to translation users to translate. The translation users you assign them to can also be services to send off to a translation service, and can also be AI, where you send your translations off to an AI to be AI translated, and they come back, and so you can develop workflows with this module to do things like, hey, I need the translations of these, I'm going to send it off to the AI, and then it's going to come back and then be reviewed by a human team. The Drupal AI suite, which is now separated off the translation module to its own module. There's an AI translation module. If you use the Drupal AI suite, you configure a model for chat and your connection for chat. Once you do this, if you enable the Drupal translation module, on the translation page, where you can add translation, you get another button that says Generate an AI translation. This module lets you set up the prompt that's being used for that, but it will take all the data from the fields and send them to your service and model of choice, ask it to translate it into the language that's the destination language, and then bring it back and save it for you. So it sort of lets you automatically translate things using AI. So better than nothing, but you know, with machine translation, your mileage will vary. All right. As I sort of mentioned before, you can make your interface language and your content language be different. There are situations where people might want to do this. It works. Drupal will do this. All right, Drupal will work fine if this happens, but it makes a site that is very difficult to explain to users what's going on. All right, I think we'll just wrap things up. If anyone has any questions for me, let me know. Thank you very much.